Cognizant of the time, I will try to be brief. But unfortunately, we're Jews. And that means we have to stay informed to a different degree than many others. Now, I advocate that people should stay informed about local, national, international politics, geopolitical situations, wars, economy, and all of that all the time, because I'm a recovering political scientist from my undergrad years. But as Jews, we don't get a choice to do this as a hobby or not, because as we talked about last week, we're going to get blamed for it anyway. So we might as well know what's actually going on and perhaps be able to set some records straight. Now, this is handicapped because as much as we can learn from what we can see in the world around us, I don't think anybody here is privy to secret CIA briefings about what's going on beyond the vision of our regular informational sources. But from our regular sources, we can still tell an awful lot. So I want to give a very brief, again, I'm aware of the time because it is a jam-packed Shabbat, so a very brief and can be extended over the Kiddush luncheon at my table, a very brief discussion of some of the actual reasons that might be behind the current war with Iran. Last week we talked about the reasons that were not behind the war with Iran, namely the Jews wanted it, or that this is a cover-up for the Epstein files, or any of the other various conspiracies that we worked our way through last week. So this week, because we got to have the follow-up of if it's not the Jews scheming, then what actually is at the heart of this? Well, it's complicated, mainly because there are multiple things that can be contributing. No single one seems to be sufficient in and of itself to explain precisely the timing and style of attack. But again, we're not privy to the secret intelligence briefings, so let's do the best we can. So, condition number one is probably the most famous for most people around the world. Iran is developing nuclear weapons. We've all heard about this, yes? Good, I'm glad that we're not completely starting out at ground zero. Sorry, unfortunate choice of words. I'll wait for you to catch up on that one. Iran has been pursuing a nuclear program for decades, and it is hard to produce nuclear weapons, and it's not so hard to stop the production of nuclear weapons. Israel has done this against Iraq in the past and against Syria's attempts because sometimes it's not that hard. And we have had numerous actions in the past. The Stuxnet virus is one of the most famous. Obviously, sanctions and other limitations on their access to materials has made a huge dent in their ability to progress. But Iran has learned from the programs of other countries how to try and harden and make sure that their program can't be derailed. And it appears that despite the attacks last year, they are still pursuing a nuclear bomb. Now, this is not in America's interest because Iran has stated quite categorically not that they will necessarily use a bomb, but that they would very much like the immunity that a bomb would grant them. Understand that this is one of the main attractions for those that pursue it. It's not a slam dunk because it invites attacks before you get the bomb. We might be seeing some of those now. But once you have the bomb, say North Korea, well, you can kind of get away with a lot more because what are they going to do? Risk being nuked back? And so there is a feeling that we needed to stop Iranian program before it reached that critical level of being able to actually have a nuclear bomb. Because Iran is a big actor in that region. Unlike North Korea, which has a moderate effect on the countries around it, Iran very much wants to be a regional hegemon. They want to be ruling over that portion, much of the Persian Empire, if you will, from antiquity that we discussed in the holiday of Purim, which brings us to reason number two for why this conflict might be unfolding. Iran has been the primary funder, but not exclusive, the primary funder of various proxy groups and terrorist organizations in the Middle East, as well as around the world. Surely you're all familiar with Hamas because of the Gaza war over the last few years. Obviously, you're probably also well aware of Hezbollah in the country of Lebanon. Neither one of those organizations would exist in the form and the scale that they exist were it not for Iranian backing of money, of arms, and international support. They are also behind the Houthis down in Yemen, and they are also responsible for numerous insurgencies in Syria, Iraq, and other parts of the Middle East, as well as antagonism to most of the Persian Gulf, other Arab oil-rich nations. They are also responsible for exporting terrorism, whether it be the attacks in Argentina many years ago at the JCC, all the way up to including synagogue attacks in Australia just this last year. They like to cause trouble for Jews, Israelis, and for anybody they feel is opposing their vision of a Middle East under their rule. And, well, right now, there can be quite strong, forceful retaliatory strikes, as well as different types of sanctions and other forms of punishment. If they were to have a nuclear umbrella protecting them, it would be much harder to strike back at them without risking an escalation into nuclear war. So, those two on their own would perhaps give us a reason. However, both of those two have been more or less around for the last 20 years. Iranian aggression as well as Iranian nuclear aspirations are not new, nor has there been any, that we can see, necessary escalation in the last few months that would precipitate a war at exactly this moment, which means we probably do not have a fully sufficient explanation of why this conflict is occurring, of why it might be advantageous for a conflict. Yes, this conflict at this moment, still incomplete. However, we can add in a third explanation that is becoming more and more relevant, which might still leave us with a bit of a fuzzy timeline, but it's one that is not discussed nearly enough. Most people do know that Iran has worked on a ballistic missiles program. Indeed, this has been one of the main threats to Israel, and Israel is currently dealing with the assault from many of those missiles into her territories. But alongside the ballistic missile program more recently, Iran has greatly accelerated its drone program. And if you're not sure exactly what good a drone does in the military, I advise you to look a few thousand miles to the north to the Ukraine. In Ukraine, we have seen from both Ukrainian as well as the Russian side that drones are a force equalizer and indeed can be almost as devastating to infrastructure and population centers as many of the more traditional attacks, whether it be artillery, missiles, or other forms of bombs. A drone system is able to overwhelm many of the systems we have developed to intercept missiles because, well, drones behave entirely differently. Drones are much more inexpensive, and drones are able to flood the area in a way that will simply prevent the current technology from intercepting. Now, Ukraine has made huge strides in intercepting drones, specifically Iranian-designed drones that Russia is making under license from Iran, and so Ukraine is hopefully going to help the other countries of the Middle East to develop good protection. But in the meantime, it means that Iran appeared to be coming to another threshold that would allow them to have a drone umbrella that, should they decide to retaliate against other nations or just precipitate naked aggression, it would overwhelm the defenses that were currently in place, exposing civilian and military populations to great risk and allowing Iran to essentially act with impunity unless you were willing to have that risk, that attack come out against you. And this does appear to have been a more recent analysis of their capabilities, that drones are actually a big deal and that they are becoming a lethal form against armies and civilian populations, a major threat that has not yet been properly countered. Now, alongside all of this, because nothing is ever as simple as just they're bad guys with weapons, we also have the issue of whether or not our strikes could make a change in Iranian policy. Because you may also be aware that for the last 50 years, America has not exactly been a big fan of Iran. Give or take a few trading of missiles by the Reagan administration. You all remember the Iran-Contra affair. Most of the time, we have kept them as isolated as possible. So what do we think we'll be able to accomplish by dropping some bombs, by firing some missiles, and attacking and sinking a few of their vessels? Well, I believe that there is some hope that the more recent protest movements in Iran gave a window of opportunity, or at least a believed window of opportunity, to perhaps do more than simply hurt the regime, but to perhaps even change it. Now, obviously, the prime time for supporting those protests would have been when they were occurring en masse a month or more ago, but unfortunately the US did not have its assets currently located there because they were busy trying to abduct Maduro from Venezuela. And as far as America can project force, we cannot be everywhere all at once. And as such, we kind of missed the prime window for supporting those protests, and tens of thousands of Iranians died in the process. But there could be hope that this attack, especially the initial attack which assassinated the Ayatollah, would be enough to bring the protesters back out and topple the regime. That does not appear to have happened, but that may explain some of the timing of this particular strike. And finally, because nothing is ever so neat and tidy that it fits within such a little bubble, we also have to consider China. America is very concerned about Chinese growth, expansionist tendencies, and aggression. And one of the main ways to try and impact the Chinese process is to, well, tweak their energy supply. Now, China is a leader in renewable energy sources, primarily because they are vulnerable when it comes to energy supplies. There are not huge oil reserves in China, nor in the areas immediately around China to be seized. And they do import a great deal of their oil from both Russia and Iran. Now, why would they import from Russia and Iran when they are international pariahs and everyone else has them under sanctions? Because it's cheaper. Every time the United States puts an oil-producing country under sanctions, China says, I'll buy from you, but because I know you can't sell to anyone else, I expect a discount. So China gets cheaper oil from Iran and from Russia, and by crippling Iranian oil production, or at the very least making it less advantageous, America is thus able to make China suffer economically more so than some other countries. And indeed, perversely, by raising the oil price for all the rest of us, which I know none of us enjoy paying when we're at the pump, it is also providing a strategic benefit against Chinese growth in their own sphere. If Iran was able to be completely overdone and have a new peaceful regime and re-enter the normal oil market, well, that would also hurt China because now it would be selling its oil at regular market rates rather than a discount. So this may have a layer of strategic intention towards trying to change China's current energy policies as well. Good. Did everybody follow all that? Okay. Now, those are the main ideas. Like I said, this is very, very rapid because of the lateness of the service, and I'm happy to go into great depth, and you'll get what you asked for, so be prepared if we talk about it in the Kiddush. But there is one last layer that I'd like to add in, which is, but how do we decide when to go to war? And I just want to give a Jewish example, because, like I said, I'm a recovering political scientist, and I'd like to speak from the Jewish point of view, which I am much more confident saying categorically how wars were declared according to Jewish law. So there is a very beautiful section in the Talmud where King David wants to go to war. He has decided it would be beneficial for the nation to attack. And the Talmud says, well, how does King David go to war? You might be thinking, he's the king. All he has to do is call up the army and go attack. No, says the Talmud. First, he has to go to the generals and ask them whether they can actually win this war. Issue number one, are we capable of winning with the objectives that we have in mind given our current forces and the forces of our enemy? If the generals say, yes, we think we could win this fight, then he has to go to the Sanhedrin. He has to go to the court and get permission from them to go to war. Because it is not merely a question of can we, there is also a question of ought we to do something like this. And those two are not synonymous. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. If the Sanhedrin is also willing to sign off on this excursion, then he goes to the Kohanim. And the Kohanim in the days of David would have what were known as the Urim and Tumim. These were stones that allowed for another way of divination. Even when prophecy was not as reliable, this would give an answer clearer from God of whether or not this was the thing to do. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, wait a minute. If they've got the hotline phone to God, why are we bothering with the Sanhedrin and why are we bothering with the generals? Just go straight to the Kohanim, dial G for God, and if God says go for it, then everything's done. Because that's not how Judaism works, and it's not how God wants us to work in this world. We are not looking only for signs and omens and portents in order to know what to do. Even those that are as clear as the Urim and Tumim, we still have to actually prepare. We still have to actually discuss, debate, and decide. Because in the end, it is our decisions that are most important. It is the process that we engage in order to know what is the right or wrong thing to do that elevates our soul each and every time we engage it. And those muscles of decision and deliberation, of analysis and consideration, those muscles atrophy if we only go to the holy rocks to answer all of our questions. While it is important to have that additional gushpanka, that stamp of approval, we have to actually exert ourselves in the groundwork to make sure that what we are doing is right and that we understand it, because ultimately that is how we individually and collectively grow spiritually, morally, and just as better human beings. Because we're not always going to have stones. Indeed, we don't anymore. Since the destruction of the first temple, we don't have those stones, and so we are left only with the analysis that we can do, which is why it is essential that we actually analyze, consider, and wonder about these things. That we do not simply sit back and say, others know better than me, and so therefore it's fine, or I know better than everyone, and I don't need to ask any more questions. We should be asking these questions. We should be wrestling with the information we have. We should each be contributing what we have heard or learned and correcting each other as necessary, because it is in that vital process that our spirit is actually grown to be a stronger and more powerful tool for finding the path of what is right and avoiding the path of what is wrong. That is the very quick version. Like I said, we can do the extended over lunch. Shabbat Shalom.